spotting that, because I shared this with my teacher there, to my shame and theirs, had no idea why I'd said this charming man. But thank you. Yes, and listening to Amy, and Amy and I had an exchange on Twitter a few weeks ago about why I picked this. And you mentioned Milton's portrayal of Satan, and we used to do that on the old Legacy AQAB. And I had a quick flick through it again, and I actually thought, I feel sorry for Lucifer in book 1 of Milton's Paradise. I don't think I feel sorry for Iago at all. I've been trying to reconcile how I feel, and that's why I've decided, I think it's to make myself feel better as well, that it's his charm, depending on how we define charm. But I mean, as we say, I was trying to think, how can someone who does and says such hideous things be someone that we, the audience, are drawn to? And more importantly, in some respects, the other characters seem to, well, they call him honest, they trust him, they ask for his advice. And so I started to sort of unpick that, as partly to salve my own conscience. Every time I read the book, the play again, students, I find something else that's loathsome about him, but I still don't hate him. And you know, obviously he's got this potential role as this Machiavellian villain, the devil incarnate potentially, or the vice figure from the morality plays, so where he's tempting everyone, and all of the. And I thought, what unites these three different potential roles and views? That actually you need to be able to get, the devil needs to persuade us to be tempted, as does the vice figure. A Machiavellian villain, if they are so deeply unpleasant, they must charm us, they must get us on their side, otherwise we wouldn't get involved with what they want us to do. And I thought, okay, and I have this phrase that I've used when we had a meeting a few weeks ago online: what does Shakespeare do on purpose? So I thought, right, okay, let's go and have a look. And I picked up, I've sort of split it into sort of various sections. The first one on is, we start a few scenes in media res. So something has gone on beforehand, a conversation. And the first scene, there's obviously been a conversation going on between Rodrigo and Iago when they arrive. And although Rodrigo's not a very good sort of mouthpiece for Iago, he obviously has persuaded him, and I'm going to keep using this word, charmed him to do what he wants. And then we see it again, less successfully initially, in the next scene when Iago and Othello appear. And it's that contrast. And so this is what shames me. We've seen him being so loathsome, so foul. And I often have a debate, not so much with the students, because I could talk about Othello for days, but why does he use that very much to us racist language? Is it to, well, I don't know, and it's something I've not really quite reconciled. But as a 21st century audience, we most certainly find that very disconcerting, very unpleasant. But we see him act 1, scene 2, they're walking in together, he's chatting, Othello's listening. There's obviously something going on there. And then I know it doesn't work out very well, because Iago's got it wrong in Act 1, Scene 2. He's not, Othello's not been taken off to be sort of grilled by Brabantio, but he's been taken off to find out more about his job. But then if we move to, and I said I have put this on a slide, but we've got, I'm just warning, we've got, it's a terrible mix. We've got about 20 meters away from the house, somebody looking at some water problems, and about 100 meters away, some people looking at some electric problems. So hopefully the two will not mix during this session or this morning. And then when we move to Act 4, Scene 1, I feel that in the interim, and we know that obviously Iago's been working on him, but by that time when we enter in media res, will you think on it, think so, Iago? And they're sharing the iambic pentameter, and about 60 lines on, we have that terrible sort of first real, very obvious falling apart of Othello, and he says that, lie with her, lie on her, we say lie on her. It's all very disconcerting. I think Iago's charm has worked, and Othello now is fully impressed with the truth of what Iago's saying. And then I also feel a little bit, I have an issue, and I'm really looking forward to, I mean, I agree with Amy that the issues with women are very interesting in the play. Um, and I'm really interested to find out more about what we think about the women, because I find Iago's relationship with both Desdemona and Emilia very, very interesting. Obviously, he's married to Emilia and at various points doesn't treat her very well, but I always start off, and I call it the banter on the beach scene because the students love that. Act 2, Scene 1. And again, what does Shakespeare do on purpose? Cassio is there all the way through, doesn't say a word. And that made me think, well, why? And I'm thinking, well, actually, that means that the banter, the way that Iago says it, isn't, even though it is hugely sexist and really condemning. And if I were Emilia, I would at that point divorce him in the 21st century anyway. But Cassio obviously doesn't feel he needs to interrupt. So I always think this sort of means it's slightly lighter. And certainly, Emilia's a bit cross and she's sort of, you've got no need to say so. You've little cause to say so, I should say. I'm getting to the age now where I misquote and it's killing me. But then Desdemona, I know she's sort of potentially trying to distract herself from waiting for Othello, but she is very keen on sort of asking him questions, drawing him out. She engages in a bit of punning. And she sort of says, she asks him to say, what would you say to praise me? And so I feel that, it's charming enough that we have sort of like 60 lines of this banter going on between the two of them. And then also later on when Cassio, it's Act 3, Scene 1, and said, I will put, this is all halfway on a PowerPoint. Cassio has lost his lieutenantship, and Desdemona's already speaking for you strongly. Emilia sort of is told by Desdemona to go and get Iago to help her out. And that means that there's still, Desdemona hasn't twigged. I mean, I know she's very innocent and naive, but there's obviously enough of charm to keep us thinking that Iago isn't presenting himself to them badly. We obviously, through the soliloquies, which I'll talk about later, know a lot more about him. And I think that it's interesting that perhaps this makes Emilia feel sort of less concerned and a sort of is charmed again by him. He's helping my mistress Desdemona and Cassio to sort everything out. And she does say in Act 3, Scene 3, I know it grieves my husband as if the case was his. And obviously the dramatic irony of that, of course it's his case, but she doesn't know that, and she takes it, he's really, really concerned that Cassio's lost his job and he wants him back in there. And we get this feeling that, well, I get this feeling that, again, what we don't see but what we hear about is that he's obviously keeping Emilia on side. Yes, he's using her, but we as the audience know that, but she doesn't. And then he encourages her to pick up Desdemona's first remembrance for the Moor, and Emilia says, I'll please his fantasy, his whim, his desire, to get that ocular proof that Othello wants. And I do sort of have a little dither because I taught myself out of things as I'm desperate to. But in that scene, Emilia is sort of saying, I don't know why he wants this handkerchief, but I will give it to him. And I always feel, when I'm feeling pro Emilia, that she may very well have thought better of it, but then Shakespeare on purpose brings Iago straight in, who snatches it off, and things sort of get back to normal. Well, in his plan anyway. I also think as well, again, later on, Act 4, Scene 2, so we're going through the play and it shows that his charm offensive is still working. When Emilia is sort of, brought to her knees by the unpleasantness of Othello calling her a whore and a strumpet, and she doesn't understand, she again says to Emilia, go call your husband, because she wants Iago's opinion on what Othello's up to. And there are other men she could have asked, Cassio, for example, but no, she returns. And again, my argument is it's the charm that Iago is exuding on his wife and on Desdemona that keep them coming back. And then we have this very bizarre discussion, don't we, about Amelia's views on men, and there's that they are stomachs, who just belch us up, which seems, I always think, well, perhaps life at home isn't brilliant for her and he's not charming her. But then we also hear her say, I'm prepared to, I think it's the husband's fault if wives do fall, but I'm also prepared to sort of sell myself to make myself and my husband go further. I don't think she's necessarily particularly talking about Iago, I don't know, but I think it's quite an interesting sort of idea as we move through the play. There's her views on Iago and on men seem to be a little bit perhaps distorted because again of Iago's charm. My next point, as I'm sort of squeezing them all together, but all of these details will be on my PowerPoint, is so he's convinced the women, he convinces the Venetian men that he is someone who is quite reliable and trustworthy. And again, my idea is that he charms them. He charms them not perhaps in the same way he charms Desdemona and Amelia, because that's one thing he does do very well. He knows, I hate to use the word that he's emotionally intelligent, but he can certainly read people and he knows the best way to charm them and to get them to do what he wants. And so in Act 2, Scene 3, when Cassio's drunk, he's very loath to sort of talk to Montano about how, he says he's a soldier fit to study Caesar, which goes back to that mere prattle without practice right back at the beginning. But he then finishes his little speech, but his behaviour will shape the island. And so I'm not going to talk about how terrible he is. He's marvellous. By the end of that scene, at the end of that little speech, I think it's 5 or 6 lines, Montano becomes convinced that Cassio cannot be left to the lieutenantship. And so we've got this notion that he's manipulating them. And then a bit later on, after Desdemona in Act 4, Scene 2, Desdemona's hit by Othello, and Ludovico asks Iago, what's going on? And Iago's response is he's much changed. They feel he's much changed. But again, very, they listen to him, they respond to what he says, they value his opinion and alter their opinion based on a snapshot of Cassio, a snapshot of Othello. And again, this, for me, it's this notion he can charm them, he can talk to them in the way that they need to be talked to. And then, and I think this is key for me anyway, it's the fact that he talks to us. I have never been to a play production, I've been to quite a few, where I've ever found an Othello, Iago that I find repellent. The only one I've ever seen is the, oh for goodness sake, who's it, Orson Welles version, when it sort of starts at the end, doesn't it? Well, I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's difficult to watch because it is so dated, but we watch the first sort of minute or so and we see Othello's coffin being taken away, and then Iago hanging in a cage, and I think he might have been hanged, I can't remember, but I certainly remember him being hanging over the city wall in a cage, and he looks to me like a sort of pantomime villain almost. But I've never seen that in any other film or play version. Iago, to me, and perhaps this is where I'm going a bit wrong, is always the most appealing character. And I've been watching Eye Contact and things like that, and they look more directly into the audience, I suppose because of the use of soliloquy and aside, than Othello ever does. And I think that connection for me, even though in his soliloquies, again, he tells us things, he charms us into liking him almost against our better judgment. We hear him say, I hate them all. That's not in a soliloquy, but that's one of the first very memorable things he says. And then, in all his other soliloquies, he tells us what he's doing. I follow him to serve my turn upon him. He tells us that, it's going to end, hell and night must bring this monstrous birth of the world's like. He tells us the terrible things he's doing. You know, he even sort of says, you know, yes, in one of his soliloquies, and I said this will be on my PowerPoint. Cassio loves her, I do well believe it. That's of Desdemona, and she just saying, you know, she's so kind, so sweet. You know, I'm going to be even, wife for wife. And I think that's quite an interesting concept. We hear this. Are we charmed by him sharing this information with us? I don't know. Are we charmed by his directness? I mean, I love the Branagh version. Well, when Branagh is Iago, when we have that Helen, you know, that sort of monstrous birth sort of end of that, where he's playing chess. It's almost as though he's developing us. And I looked at it again last night, and I noticed that he uses a white chess piece to knock the black chess piece down, which is fairly obvious when you think about it, but I'd never thought about it and I never looked that closely. But it's very subtle. Are we introduced, you know, do we feel that we empathize is not the right word. Do we feel, and that's what I'm coming back to, are we charmed by him? The fact that he is sharing his deepest, darkest thoughts. Do we feel sorry for him? I think we do at the beginning when he tells us, you know, I've been passed over for a job that other people, you know, have said I would have been brilliant at. You know, he talks about these three noteworthy high up officials in Venice. Do we believe him? And I think you do at the start, even though he says some terrible things that he counters later on. And then, you know, he tells us, doesn't he? I am not what I am. I play the villain. Yet for me, I'm still there. I'm still there thinking, I don't know what's going to happen next. Is this going to be thwarted? We, of course, know it isn't. And then one little quick thing I noticed when I was looking through a couple of days ago in Act 3, Scene 3, when he tells us handkerchief scene, and this is what reminded me of Amy's comment about Satan. He talks about he'll lose the napkin in Cassio's room to get it all sorted, and then he talks about the mines of sulfur, which reminded me of the Miltonic sort of description of early hell, book 1 hell, that Lucifer is in. And I'm going to finish in 2 minutes with just talking about the final scene. And for me, I find this very, very interesting. If it's a revenge tragedy, and I know there's an argument both ways, then what should happen at the end is that order should be restored from the chaos that has gone on throughout the play. And I saw a very interesting production where at the start, and I remember thinking, I've been at school all day, and I think, oh God, there was chaos, literally noise all over the place, discordant trumpets. And I then twigged when we got to the end when chaos had disappeared and order was restored and all the military men were lined up in rows very professionally, that was what it's going to do. But what's the notion of revenge tragedy? That anyone who oversteps their mark, and I do think of him as part of the other in the way that I think Othello is the other, the women are the other. He isn't very obviously punished. Now, I know that it's any cunning cruelty, but who's going to do this torture? Do we trust them? Do we trust Cassio to torture someone? I don't know. For me, why did Shakespeare leave it like that? He's done that on purpose. Why, I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced of Othello's comments about him. I look down towards his feet, but that's a fable. If that thou beest a devil, I cannot kill thee, right in towards the end of Act 2, well, in Act 5, Scene 2. And I said I have put all of these things on my PowerPoint. I'm not convinced he is the devil incarnate there, but it's interesting, you know, he chooses silence, demand me nothing. And I think that's interesting in and of itself. An explanation of his rationale would be uncharming, I think. So the fact that we don't hear anything keeps that sort of mystique about him alive. I'm in two minds about how I feel about him. I know I shouldn't like him. He's foul. He's unpleasant to his wife. He manipulates
Kathryn, I think you've muted yourself.
Thank you. I was saying, so, you know, is he charming? Thank you very much for that. So unfortunately, I had a little blip on the power, so it went to battery power for a second. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you great. Thank
brilliant,
you.
thank you. Well, I will just finish very quickly by saying I will put this up, and I do apologise. I've had so many struggles with working from home with having no electricity. As you can imagine, I've had to just store the battery when I can. But I would value people's comments, and thank you to those I've already seen. But I would, when I put my PowerPoint up, and I'll attach it to my Twitter handle that I included earlier on, I'd love some feedback. But thank you very much.